The courtroom was silent as the judge read the verdict. Officer Sarah Miller stood frozen, her hands trembling in cuffs. "Guilty," the judge declared. A gasp echoed through the room. Murder. Life sentence. Her German shepherd, Rex, whined from the corner, his ears pinned back. He didn't understand the words, but he felt the fear in Sarah's scent. As guards dragged her away, Rex let out a desperate bark, one that held a promise. He wouldn't leave her, not like this, not ever. The steel doors of Blackridge Penitentiary clanged shut behind Sarah, sealing her into a world of concrete and shadows. The guards led her through the dimly lit corridors, their boots echoing against the cold floor. She kept her head down, but her mind raced. How had everything gone so wrong? That night played in her head like a broken record. The gunshot, the blood, the panicked voice on the radio screaming, "Officer down!" But it wasn't her bullet. Someone had framed her, and now she was here, trapped in a nightmare with no way out. Outside the prison walls, Rex paced restlessly in the kennel where they'd taken him after Sarah's arrest. His sharp ears twitched at every sound, his muscles tense. He could still smell her fear, her desperation. The other dogs barked, but Rex ignored them. His focus was absolute. When the kennel worker opened his cage to feed him, Rex saw his chance. With a sudden lunge, he slipped past the man's legs and bolted into the night. The shouts behind him faded as he disappeared into the trees, his powerful legs carrying him toward the only thing that mattered, Sarah. Meanwhile, inside the prison, Sarah was thrown into a cramped cell. The inmate across from her, a hardened woman with scars on her face, smirked. "Cops don't last long in here," she hissed. Sarah didn't respond. She sat on the thin mattress, staring at her hands. They'd taken her badge, her uniform, her freedom, but they couldn't take her will to survive. Somewhere out there, the real killer was still free, and if she ever got out, she'd find them. Hours passed. The prison lights dimmed for the night. Sarah barely slept, her nerves on edge. Then, just before dawn, she heard it. A faint scratching at the window. Her heart pounded. The window was high up, barred, impossible to reach. But the sound came again. Scritch, scritch. She stood on her bunk, straining to see. And then a familiar whine. Her breath caught, number it couldn't be. But there, outside the grimy glass, was Rex. His fur was matted with mud, his paws bleeding from the miles he'd run, but his eyes burned with determination. He'd found her. Sarah's hands pressed against the glass. "Rex, how?" she whispered. The dog pawed at the wall uselessly. He couldn't get in, but he wasn't leaving. Sarah's mind raced. If the guards saw him, they'd take him away, or worse. She had to think fast. Then, from the shadows of the yard, a figure emerged. A tall man in a guard's uniform, but his face was unfamiliar. He stared at Rex, then up at Sarah's window. A slow smile spread across his face. "Well, well," he murmured. "Looks like the dog's smarter than we thought." Sarah's blood ran cold. She knew that voice. It was the same one from that night, the one that had whispered, "Nobody will believe you," before the gunshot rang out. This wasn't just a guard. This was the man who'd set her up. And now he'd seen Rex. The guard's chilling smile sent a wave of terror through Sarah's body. She stumbled back from the window, her breath coming in short gasps. He was here. The same man who had planted the evidence, who had watched coldly as she was dragged away in handcuffs, now stood just yards away from Rex. Her mind raced. Why was he working inside the prison? Was he here to finish what he started? The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. She wasn't just imprisoned. She was trapped in the lion's den, and the predator had just found her. Outside, Rex's instincts screamed at him. The man's scent triggered something deep in his memory. Gunpowder, the metallic tang of blood, the adrenaline stink of violence. This was the enemy. A low growl rumbled in his chest as he backed away, his body coiled tight like a spring. The guard took a step forward, his hand drifting toward the baton on his belt. "Should have put you down with your dirty cop owner," he muttered. Just as he moved to grab Rex, a sudden commotion erupted from the prison yard, shouting guards, the blare of an alarm. Someone had spotted a hole in the perimeter fence. In that split second of distraction, Rex vanished into the shadows again, his paws silent against the damp grass. Back in her cell, Sarah pressed herself against the wall, her pulse pounding in her ears. She had to warn Rex, had to make him understand the danger. But how? The prison's rigid schedule gave her only one opportunity: the next morning's yard time. If she could get a message out, if she could somehow signal him. Her thoughts were interrupted by the screech of her cell door opening. The scar-faced inmate from earlier stood there, flanked by two others. "New fish always get a welcome party," the woman sneered, cracking her knuckles. Sarah knew what was coming. She'd trained for prison survival, but 3 against 1 were impossible odds. Just as the first punch flew, a guard's whistle pierced the air. "Break it up!" The inmate scattered, but not before Sarah caught the glint of something metal being slipped under her mattress. When she checked later, her fingers closed around a crude shiv and a folded note. "Your dog's not the only one who knows the truth. Meet me in laundry detail tomorrow. A friend." The next morning, the prison buzzed with tension. Overnight, someone had hacked into the security cameras near the west wall, the same section where Rex had been spotted. Whispers spread among the inmates about a ghost dog haunting the prison. Sarah kept her head down during roll call, but her eyes constantly scanned for the traitorous guard. When she finally spotted him, her blood ran cold. He was speaking urgently into a radio, his gaze darting toward the forest beyond the fence. Then she saw why. A news van was parked just outside the prison gates. A reporter stood with a microphone, gesturing toward the building. What were they doing here? Yard time arrived. As Sarah stepped into the open air, her eyes immediately went to the towering perimeter walls. Then she saw it. A flash of golden fur near the tree line. Rex was still here, still waiting. Her heart swelled, but the moment was shattered by a hand grabbing her arm. It was a petite woman in prison grays, her face hidden by a hood. "Laundry. Now," she whispered before melting into the crowd. Sarah followed, her mind whirling. The laundry room was a steamy, chaotic space filled with the roar of industrial machines. Her mysterious contact pulled her behind a mountain of sheets. "Listen carefully," the woman said, her voice barely audible. "That guard? His name's Vance. He's dirty, works for the cartel. You were set up because you got too close to their operations, and you're not the first." She pressed a small photograph into Sarah's hand. It showed Vance shaking hands with a known drug lord, on the same night her partner was murdered. A deafening crash echoed through the prison. The ground shook as alarms wailed. Through the small laundry room window, Sarah saw smoke billowing from the east wing. In the chaos, inmates began screaming, guards running in every direction. Her contact gripped her arm tighter. "That's your chance. Vance is distracted. There's a hole in the fence near the boiler room, big enough for you, but you have to go now." Sarah hesitated only a second. "What about you?" The woman's eyes hardened. "I've got my own score to settle. Just get to your dog. He's your only hope now." As Sarah slipped through the panicked crowds, she heard something that made her blood freeze. The sharp, commanding bark of a German shepherd. Rex wasn't just waiting. He'd caused the explosion, and he was coming for her. The acrid smell of smoke burned Sarah's nostrils as she pushed through the panicked crowd of inmates, her body moving on pure instinct. The explosion had turned the prison into a swirling nightmare of shouting guards, flickering emergency lights, and the relentless blare of alarms. Somewhere in this chaos, Vance was hunting, both for her and for Rex. The thought of her loyal dog risking everything to save her sent a fresh wave of determination through her veins. She had to reach that hole in the fence, had to trust that Rex would find her. The laundry woman's words echoed in her mind. "He's your only hope now." Shoving past a group of terrified inmates, Sarah ducked into a narrow maintenance corridor. The boiler room was just ahead, its door slightly ajar. Her pulse hammered as she slipped inside, the sudden heat wrapping around her like a suffocating blanket. Pipes hissed overhead, their steam creating eerie shifting shadows on the walls. Then she saw it, a jagged gap in the metal siding near the floor, just big enough to crawl through. Freedom was inches away, but as she dropped to her knees, a boot slammed down in front of the opening. "Going somewhere, officer." Vance's voice dripped with the venom. Sarah looked up to see his gun pointed directly at her face, his eyes gleaming with triumph. Outside, Rex's ears pricked up at the sound of Sarah's muffled shout. Every muscle in his body tensed. He'd spent hours memorizing the prison's routines, creating diversions, waiting for this moment. The explosion had been easy, a chewed electrical wire near stored cleaning chemicals. But now, Sarah's scent spiked with terror. Without hesitation, Rex launched himself at a nearby ventilation grate, his powerful claws tearing at the rusted metal until it gave way. The narrow duct was barely large enough for his body, but he wriggled forward inch by inch, following Sarah's fading cries. Back in the boiler room, Sarah scrambled backward as Vance advanced. "You really think a mutt could outsmart me?" he sneered, cocking the hammer of his pistol. "I'll put a bullet in his skull right after I finish you." Sarah's back hit the scalding pipes, the pain searing through her shirt. But then, a metallic clang from above. Vance barely had time to look up before 90 pounds of furious German shepherd dropped onto his shoulders. Rex's jaws clamped onto the gun arm with crushing force, the bone snapping audibly. Vance's scream was cut short as Sarah tackled him, her fist connecting with his jaw in a satisfying crunch. As Vance slumped unconscious, Sarah grabbed the gun and turned to Rex. His muzzle was streaked with blood, his sides heaving, but his eyes were clear and focused. "Good boy," she whispered, pressing her forehead to his. But their reunion was interrupted by the sound of running footsteps. Sarah tensed, until she saw it was the laundry woman, her face flushed with urgency. "They've sealed the outer gates," she panted. "Vance called for backup before you took him down. Cartel men are coming. They'll kill everyone who knows the truth." Sarah's mind raced. The photo evidence in her pocket, Rex's presence, the unconscious guard at her feet. It would all look like a cop's desperate revenge story. Then an idea struck her. She quickly frisked Vance, finding a keycard and a burner phone. The last dialed number had a familiar area code, the same precinct where her partner had been murdered. "We need to get to the evidence locker," Sarah said suddenly. "If Vance was dirty, he's got proof stashed here, something that could clear my name." The laundry woman, who introduced herself as Maya, a former accountant imprisoned for uncovering cartel money, nodded grimly. "I know where it is, but we'll have to go through maximum security." Rex let out a soft woof, his tail stiff with anticipation. Sarah checked the gun's ammunition. 6 rounds. "Then let's move," she said. before more of Vance's friends show up. As they slipped back into the smoke-filled corridors, Sarah realized the prison was now in full lockdown. Distant shouts and the occasional gunshot echoed through the halls. Somewhere ahead lay the evidence that could exonerate her, but between them and the truth stood an army of corrupt guards and cartel killers. And worst of all, the warden had just announced over the PA system, all units, code black, lethal force authorized. The trio moved like shadows through the prison's underbelly, their footsteps muffled by the distant chaos still raging through the cell blocks. Sarah kept Vance's stolen gun ready, her finger resting lightly on the trigger as they navigated the maze of service tunnels Maya seemed to know by heart. Every creak of metal or distant shout sent adrenaline spiking through her veins. Rex trotted silently beside her, his ears constantly swiveling, his nose working overtime to sort through the cocktail of sweat, gunpowder, and fear hanging thick in the air. The deeper they went, the more the prison felt like a living beast, its concrete bones groaning around them, its fluorescent veins flickering ominously overhead. Maya paused at a junction, her face ghostly pale in the emergency lighting. "Evidence lockers 2 levels up," she whispered, pointing to a maintenance ladder. "But the warden's office overlooks that corridor. If he's in on this—" Her words trailed off as a new sound cut through the tension, the distinct click of a rifle's safety being switched off. Sarah reacted on pure instinct, shoving Maya behind a stack of supply crates as a bullet whined past where her head had been. Rex exploded into motion, a golden blur streaking toward the shooter lurking in the shadows. The guard barely had time to scream before 90 pounds of furious canine took him down, the rifle skittering across the floor. Sarah scooped it up, her hands moving automatically to check the magazine, fully loaded. "They're hunting us now," she muttered, peering around the corner. The prison's PA system crackled to life again. "All personnel. Suspect is armed and extremely dangerous. Shoot on sight." The warden's voice held an edge Sarah recognized, the panic of a man whose house of cards was collapsing. Maya grabbed Sarah's arm, her nails digging in. "We can't go up, not yet." She pointed to a grated floor drain. "There's another way, the old storm tunnels. They run under the whole complex." Sarah hesitated, visions of rats and pitch-black tunnels flashing through her mind. But Rex was already at the grate, sniffing intently. Then he stiffened, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Sarah heard it too. Boots, lots of them. Coming fast. With Maya's help, they pried up the heavy grate just as the first flashlight beams cut through the gloom behind them. The drop into darkness was sudden and brutal, Sarah's ankle twisting painfully on impact. Above them, angry shouts faded as Maya replaced the grate with trembling hands. The storm tunnel was a claustrophobic nightmare, ankle-deep in foul-smelling water, so narrow they had to move the single file. Maya led the way using Vance's stolen phone as a flashlight, its dim glow revealing decades of graffiti scratched into the bricks. Sarah limped behind, biting back pain with every step. Rex brought up the rear, his body a living radar system tuned to any pursuit. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, Maya stopped abruptly. "This is it," she whispered, pointing upward. "Directly below the evidence room." Sarah's eyes followed her finger to a rusted access panel in the ceiling. The ladder rungs set into the wall were corroded nearly to nothing. As Sarah reached for the first rung, Rex suddenly shoved past her, his body rigid with tension. Before she could react, the dog launched himself at the tunnel wall, his claws finding purchase on the ancient bricks. With impossible agility, he scaled the sheer surface like some four-legged spider, reaching the access panel in seconds. Then came the sound Sarah would never forget. The wet, tearing crunch of Rex's jaws closing on something fleshy in the darkness above. A strangled cry echoed down the shaft, followed by a heavy thud. When Rex reappeared at the edge of the opening, his muzzle was dark with fresh blood. Maya made a choked sound. They were waiting for us. Sarah's stomach turned as she climbed up to find a guard's body sprawled beside the open evidence room floor panel, his throat torn out. The room itself was a disaster. File cabinets overturned, papers everywhere. But one drawer remained intact, its heavy lock gleaming in the dim emergency lights. Sarah's police training kicked in as she surveyed the scene. This was staged, she realized aloud. They destroyed everything, except... She crossed to the locked drawer, examining it closely. The metal was scratched around the keyhole, recently. Someone had tried very hard to get in. Maya was already at the computer terminal, her fingers flying over the keys. I can't access the main system, but... The screen flickered as she inserted a USB drive from her pocket. Local backups might still be intact. Sarah watched in amazement as lines of code scrolled by. "You're no accountant," she accused softly. Maya didn't look up. "Forensic cybercrimes, actually. Got too close to the cartel's money laundering." The computer beeped triumphantly, displaying a file labeled Operation Blue Shield. Sarah's breath caught. That was her dead partner's last case. The video that opened showed Vance in full uniform, shaking hands with men Sarah recognized from cartel most wanted bulletins. The timestamp was the night before her partner's murder. But it was the conversation that turned her blood to ice. "The shipment comes in tomorrow," Vance was saying. "Miller and her K-9 are the only ones who might intercept. Take care of it." The camera panned to reveal the warden himself pouring drinks for the cartel members. Maya gasped. This is everything." A sudden crash from the corridor outside sent them all scrambling. Rex positioned himself between the door and Sarah, his lips peeled back in a silent snarl. The handle turned slowly. Sarah raised the rifle, her finger tightening on the trigger. The door flew open to reveal, not guards, but 3 inmates armed with makeshift weapons. The leader, a hulking man with prison tattoos covering his face, grinned at their shocked expressions. "Relax, cop," he rumbled. "We're the distraction." As if on cue, a massive explosion rocked the far side of the prison. The inmates' grins widened. "Whole block just happened to riot near the east gate. You've got about 5 minutes before every pig in this place comes running." Sarah didn't waste time questioning their motives. With Maya's help, she pried open the locked drawer. Inside was a single evidence bag containing her partner's notebook. The pages were filled with names, dates, and one circled address, a waterfront warehouse. The last entry read, "Vance is dirty. Meet at Rally Point, Charlie. If I don't make it, give this to..." The writing ended abruptly. Sarah's vision blurred with tears. She quickly blinked away. This was more than proof of her innocence. This was a map to the cartel's heart. Rex's sudden bark snapped her back to the present. The inmates were gesturing urgently. "Time's up! Move!" As they fled back to the storm tunnel, Sarah caught a glimpse of the prison's security monitors. What she saw made her blood run cold. Vance was alive, his arm in a sling, directing a small army of guards toward the evidence room. And he wasn't alone. The warden stood beside him, his face twisted in rage, barking orders into a radio. But most terrifying of all was the new player who'd just arrived. A sleek black SUV with tinted windows now parked in the prison courtyard. Even through the grainy footage, Sarah recognized the man who stepped out. El Escorpión, the cartel's legendary enforcer. And he was carrying a dog catcher's pole. The storm tunnel's oppressive darkness swallowed them whole as they scrambled away from the evidence room, their breaths coming in ragged gasps that echoed off the dripping walls. Sarah clutched her partner's notebook to her chest like a holy relic, its pages crackling with every hurried step. Behind them, the sounds of shouting and crashing furniture grew fainter, but the image of El Escorpion's arrival burned fresh in Sarah's mind. That dog catcher's pole could mean only one thing. They weren't just after her anymore. Rex sensed it too. His shoulder pressed tight against Sarah's leg as they moved, a constant warm presence in the chill dampness. Maya led the way with the phone's dying light, her whispers bouncing off the curved walls. "There's an exit near the old generator. Comes up behind the visitor parking." The words had barely left her mouth when the tunnel shook with another explosion, this one closer, sending a shower of rust and concrete dust raining down on them. Sarah coughed into her sleeve, tasting blood. That wasn't part of the inmates' distraction. The cartel was making their move. Rex suddenly froze, his nose quivering. Before Sarah could react, he lunged past Maya with a snarl, disappearing around a bend in the tunnel. A man's scream cut through the darkness, followed by the wet sounds of a struggle. Sarah sprinted forward, Vance's gun raised, only to skid to a stop at the sight before her. A guard in full riot gear lay sprawled in the filthy water, his helmet rolling away as Rex stood triumphantly over him, the man's throat ripped open. But it was what lay beyond that made Sarah's stomach drop. 3 more guards were advancing down the tunnel, their flashlight beams slicing through the gloom. The lead officer's eyes widened at the sight of them. "Freeze! Prisoner escape in Prague!" His shout turned to a gurgle as Maya's shiv found his jugular. Sarah didn't hesitate. 2 quick shots dropped the remaining guards before they could raise their weapons. The gunfire echoed like thunder in the confined space. "Now, they know exactly where we are," Maya panted, wiping her blade on a dead guard's uniform. Sarah was already moving, grabbing one of the fallen flashlights. Its beam revealed something that made her blood run cold, fresh paw prints leading away from the fight. Not Rex's, larger, and they were accompanied by boot prints. "They've got dogs," she breathed. Not just any dogs. Rex's littermate, Diablo, the K9 El Escorpion, had trained specifically to hunt other dogs. Sarah had seen the scars on Rex's flank from their last encounter during a botched raid. Diablo didn't just attack, he tortured. The tunnel branched ahead, the left path marked with a faded generator sign. They'd almost reached it when Rex suddenly whirled, his entire body tensing. From the darkness behind them came a sound that raised the hairs on Sarah's neck. A deep, rhythmic panting, followed by the clink of a choke chain. Then a voice like ground glass. "Come out, Para. I want you to watch when my dog takes your mud apart, piece by piece." El Escorpion. Sarah's flashlight beam caught the glint of his gold-capped teeth as he stepped into view, the massive German shepherd at his side straining against its leash. Diablo's eyes reflected red in the light, his lips curled back from teeth filed to points. Maya made a small, terrified sound. Sarah's mind raced. They were trapped. El Escorpion behind them, the generator exit too far ahead. Then Rex did something unexpected. He stepped forward, his tail high, and let out a single, deafening bark that echoed down the tunnels. Diablo went berserk, yanking free from El Escorpion's grip. The cartel enforcer laughed. "Stupid dog, now you die." But Sarah saw Rex's ears flick toward the ceiling. A deliberate movement. Her eyes followed. The explosion earlier must have damaged the ancient pipes overhead. They hung precariously, leaking steam. A plan formed instantly. As Diablo charged, Sarah raised her gun, not at the dog, but at the rusted pipe junction above El Escorpion's head. The shot rang out, followed by a metallic groan. For a heart-stopping second, nothing happened. Then, with a shriek of tearing metal, the entire pipe system came crashing down in a scalding avalanche. El Escorpion vanished under a cloud of superheated steam and debris. Diablo yelped as a chunk of pipe caught his hind leg, his charge faltering. Rex didn't hesitate. He met his brother mid-leap, their bodies colliding with a sickening thud Sarah couldn't watch. Maya was already pulling her toward the generator exit. "We have to go now," but Sarah planted her feet. "Not without Rex." The dogfight was a whirl of snapping jaws and flying fur. Diablo had the size advantage, but Rex was smarter, darting in to inflict damage, then dancing away as the injured Diablo stumbled. Finally, Rex saw his opening. One brutal lunge closed his jaws around Diablo's throat. The larger dog thrashed, his screams muffled by Rex's unrelenting grip, until suddenly, silence. Rex released his dead brother and limped to Sarah's side. His muzzle was bloody, one ear nearly torn off, but his eyes were clear. The three of them ran for the exit as the tunnel behind them filled with shouts and the hiss of escaping steam. The generator room door was locked, but a few shots from Sarah's gun took care of that. They burst out into blinding sunlight, finding themselves in a neglected corner of the prison yard. The visitor parking lot was just beyond the fence, and miraculously, the riot had drawn most of the guards away. Maya spotted a lone news van still parked near the gate, its crew filming the smoke rising from the prison. "Our ticket out," she gasped. But as they crept closer, Sarah realized something was wrong. The van's side door hung open. The camera lay smashed on the pavement, and sitting casually on the bumper was a man Sarah recognized from the evidence video, the cartel's money launderer. He smiled as he raised a pistol. "Long way to run for nothing, Officer Miller." Rex growled, but even he was too exhausted to attack. Sarah's gun was empty. Maya trembled beside her. Then, a familiar voice from inside the van. "Get in, now." The back doors flew open to reveal the tattooed inmate from the evidence room, his face split in a grin. "Told you we'd meet again." As the money launderer spun to face this new threat, Sarah saw her chance. She tackled him to the ground, driving her knee into his gun hand. The weapon skittered away as Rex pounced, his teeth finding the man's forearm. The inmate didn't hesitate. He slammed the van door shut on the cartel man's legs with a sickening crunch. "No time!" he yelled as the engine roared to life. They piled in just as more gunfire erupted. The van peeled away, its tires spitting gravel. Sarah collapsed against the seats, her arms around Rex, as the prison shrank in the distance. But her relief was short-lived. The inmate, who introduced himself as Gears, leaned back from the wheel with a grim expression. "Don't celebrate yet, ladies. That warehouse address in your book, it's not just any cartel spot." He met Sarah's eyes in the rearview mirror. "It's where they train all their attack dogs. And after today, they'll be expecting you." The van's engine whined as it sped down the back roads, its suspension groaning under the weight of their desperate escape. Sarah pressed a wad of torn fabric against Rex's bleeding ear, her fingers trembling not from fear but from the adrenaline still coursing through her veins. The notebook in her lap felt heavier than it should. Those scribbled pages held the power to destroy her or save her, depending on who got their hands on it first. Outside, the landscape blurred into a smear of trees and fading sunlight, but Sarah's mind was stuck on Gear's last words. A dog training facility. That explained Diablo's unnatural viciousness, the way he fought with none of Rex's disciplined training, but all the savagery of a wild animal pushed beyond its limits. Maya broke the silence first, her voice barely above a whisper, as she examined the USB drive they'd retrieved. "This doesn't just implicate Vance and the warden," she said, her fingers flying across a laptop they'd scavenged from the news van. "There are transaction records here. Payments to half the city council, judges, even feds." She turned the screen to show a spreadsheet with dates and amounts that made Sarah's stomach turn. "This is why your partner died. He wasn't just investigating the cartel. He'd uncovered the whole rotten system." Gears took a sharp turn onto an even narrower road, the van's headlights cutting through the gathering dusk. "We can't go to the cops," he muttered, his eyes constantly flicking to the rearview mirror. "Not until we know who's clean." Sarah knew he was right, but the reality of their situation settled over her like a lead blanket. She was a fugitive now, with nothing but a wounded dog, a hacker, and an ex-con for allies. Rex whined softly, nudging her hand with his wet nose, as if sensing her spiraling thoughts. She buried her fingers in his fur, drawing strength from his steady presence. "We need weapons," she said at last, "and a plan to hit that warehouse." Maya pulled up satellite images of the location from the notebook. The facility sprawled across an isolated stretch of waterfront, surrounded by high fences and patrolled by armed guards. But it was the outbuilding marked Kennel B that made Sarah's breath catch. A concrete structure with a single reinforced door and no windows. "That's where they train the attack dogs," she realized aloud. The images showed exercise yards filled with German shepherds, Rottweilers, and Dobermans, each wearing spiked collars. A memory surfaced. Her partner joking darkly about rumors of the cartel's special K9 unit before his death. He hadn't been joking after all. Gears pulled over near an abandoned barn, killing the engine. "We rest here tonight," he announced, his tone brooking no argument. "Tomorrow we hit them at dawn. Their shift change is always sloppy." Sarah wanted to protest, but Rex's labored breathing decided for her. He needed rest, even if she didn't. As they settled in the musty hayloft, Maya kept working on the laptop, her face bathed in the eerie blue glow. "I found something else," she murmured hours later, waking Sarah from a fitful doze. The screen showed security footage from inside the warehouse. Rows of cages, dogs hooked to IV drips, men in lab coats injecting something into their veins. "They're doping them," Maya breathed. "Some kind of aggression serum." Sarah's blood ran cold. She'd seen what a normal attack dog could do. The thought of dozens of Diablos, hopped up on drugs designed to erase their last shreds of restraint, made her physically ill. Rex lifted his head at the whimpers coming from the laptop's speakers, his ears flattening against his skull. Sarah stroked his back absently, her mind racing. This wasn't just about clearing her name anymore. If that serum hit the streets, if the cartel started selling enhanced attack dogs to every two-bit gang and terrorist cell. A sudden noise outside snapped them all to attention. Rex was on his feet instantly, his lips peeled back in a silent snarl. Gears motioned for silence as he crept to the barn's edge, peering through a crack in the wood. His shoulders tensed. "Cops," he mouthed. "5 cruisers, lights off." Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. They'd been found. But how? Then she noticed it. A faint blinking red light near the van's rear bumper. A tracker. Vance must have planted it before they ever left the prison. Rex pressed against her leg, his body vibrating with tension. Outside, car doors opened and closed with quiet thuds. Radio static crackled. A familiar voice, Vance's, said something about taking the cop alive. Sarah's fingers found the pistol tucked into her waistband. 3 bullets left. Not nearly enough. Gears pointed to a rusted hatch in the barn floor, an old root cellar. "Go," he hissed. "I'll lead them away." Maya didn't hesitate, already sliding into the darkness below. Sarah hesitated only a second before following, Rex slipping in silently behind her. The cellar was dank and cramped, the air thick with the smell of earth and decay. Above them, heavy boots crunched across the barn floor. Then Gear's voice, loud and taunting. "Evening, officers. Lose something?" A gunshot rang out, followed by the squeal of tires as Gear's stolen van roared to life. The cops shouted, giving chase, their sirens wailing to life as they disappeared into the night. Sarah exhaled shakily. They were safe for now. But as she turned to Maya in the dim light, the hacker's face was pale with horror. "Sarah," she whispered, holding up the laptop. The screen showed a live news feed. Gear's van surrounded by police vehicles, the officers opening fire without warning. The camera zoomed in on the bullet-riddled windshield, revealing Gears slumped over the wheel, and beside him, the notebook, its pages clearly visible to the cameras. Sarah's vision swam. Every piece of evidence, every name her partner had died to collect, now broadcast to the very people on that list. The cartel would be coming for them with everything they had. And worse, they now knew exactly where Sarah was headed. The warehouse wouldn't just be guarded tomorrow. It would be a trap. The cellar's oppressive darkness seemed to pulse around them as the reality of their situation settled in. Sarah's fingers clenched around the pistol grip until her knuckles ached, her mind reeling from the live footage of Gear's execution. That notebook had been their only leverage. Now it was in the hands of the very people who wanted them dead. Maya's laptop screen cast ghostly shadows across her face as she frantically typed, pulling up maps and security blueprints. "We're not completely burned," she whispered, her voice tight. "I copied all the files, but we need to move before they triangulate this signal." Outside, distant sirens still wailed, but the immediate danger had passed. For now. Rex nudged Sarah's hand with his wet nose, his breathing steadier now, but his eyes still clouded with pain. The torn ear would leave a nasty scar, another mark to add to the collection of wounds he'd taken for her. Sarah ran her fingers through his fur, drawing strength from his warmth. They'd lost Gears, lost the notebook, but they still had the warehouse address burned into their memories, and the grim knowledge of what was happening there. The image of those drugged dogs haunted her. She'd seen what chemicals could do to a canine's mind. The cartel wasn't just training attack dogs, they were creating monsters. Maya suddenly stiffened, her fingers freezing over the keyboard. "Oh God," she breathed. The screen showed a paused frame from the news broadcast, a close-up of the notebook's open page. Zoomed in, Sarah could just make out her partner's handwriting. "Warehouse 42, final shipment goes out Thursday. If compromised, activate Protocol Cerberus." The date circled beside it was tomorrow. Maya's fingers trembled as she pulled up a dark web forum. Cerberus isn't just a protocol name, it's a product line. The page she revealed showed grainy photos of dogs fitted with explosive vests, their eyes wild and unfocused. The caption made Sarah's blood turn to ice. "Guaranteed maximum carnage. Urban deployment package available upon request." Sarah's police training kicked in, shoving aside the horror to focus on cold, hard logistics. "We need to hit that warehouse tonight, before they move those dogs or arm them." Maya nodded, already packing up the laptop. "There's an old hunting cabin about 3 miles from here. Friend of Gear's stashes supplies there. We can gear up and—" A sudden crash from above cut her off. Not cops. This was the sound of something heavy being dragged across the barn floor. Then a wet, guttural panting that raised the hairs on Sarah's neck. Rex was on his feet instantly, his body rigid. That wasn't human, and it wasn't just any dog. Sarah knew that particular rasping breath. She'd heard it right before Diablo attacked in the tunnels. But Diablo was dead. Weren't he? The root cellar's hatch trembled as something massive slammed against it. Wood splintered. Maya scrambled back, her eyes wide with terror. Sarah raised her pistol, all 3 remaining rounds suddenly feeling woefully inadequate. Then the hatch exploded inward in a shower of rotten wood. The creature that dropped into the cellar barely resembled a German shepherd anymore. Its muscles bulged grotesquely under patchy fur, its eyes bloodshot and rolling wildly. Foam dripped from jaws lined with filed teeth, just like Diablo's had been. But this was worse, much worse. Metal gleamed along its spine, some kind of implanted cybernetic harness. The monstrosity didn't growl, it didn't bark. It simply fixed those mad eyes on Rex and charged. Sarah fired instinctively. The first shot went wide, embedding in the dirt wall. The second caught the beast in the shoulder, barely slowing it. Rex met the charge head-on, their bodies colliding with a sickening thud. Sarah lined up her final shot, but the dogs were a twisting, snarling blur in the confined space. Maya yanked her arm, pointing to a narrow drainage pipe barely visible behind collapsed shelving. "Go!" Sarah hesitated only a second before diving into the tight space, Maya right behind her. The last thing Sarah saw before the pipe swallowed them was Rex locked in mortal combat with the augmented beast, his blood mixing with the things in the dirt. The pipe was a claustrophobic nightmare, barely wide enough to squirm through. Behind them, the sounds of the dogfight grew fainter, replaced by the scrape of claws on metal as the creature apparently gave chase. Sarah's elbows burned as she dragged herself forward, the pipe sloping upward slightly. After an eternity, faint moonlight appeared ahead. They spilled out into a drainage ditch just as the pipe behind them collapsed, the creature's furious snarls muffled by earth. No sign of Rex. Sarah's heart threatened to crack her ribs. Every instinct screamed to go back, but Maya grabbed her face, forcing eye contact. "He's K9, she said fiercely. "He'll find us, but we have to move now." Sarah allowed herself to be pulled away, her soul tearing in two as they fled toward the tree line. The hunting cabin was their only hope now. If they could reach it. If the supplies were still there, if they could somehow take down an entire warehouse full of those things. As they disappeared into the woods, a single gunshot echoed in the distance. Then silence. Sarah refused to consider what that might mean. She focused instead on the faint rustle of leaves ahead, a sound too deliberate to be the wind. A shadow detached itself from the trees, limping but alive. Rex. Blood matted his fur, his gait uneven, but his eyes were clear. Clamped gently in his jaws was a twisted piece of metal, the cybernetic harness from his fallen enemy, a trophy, a warning, and perhaps most importantly, intel. Maya took the mangled device with reverence. "This changes everything," she murmured, turning it over in her hands. Tiny LEDs still flickered weakly along its length. "If we can access its data..." Sarah didn't need to hear more. The cabin was close now. Somewhere ahead lay weapons, supplies, and maybe, just maybe, a way to turn the cartel's own technology against them. But as they moved through the moonlit forest, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling they were being herded. The warehouse might be their target, but the real game was being played by rules they didn't yet understand. And time was running out. The hunting cabin emerged from the trees like a forgotten relic, its weathered wood groaning in the night wind. Rex moved stiffly ahead of them, his nose working overtime to detect any threats, every muscle in his battered body tense with residual adrenaline. Sarah's fingers itched for a weapon that wasn't empty as Maya picked the rusted padlock with a hairpin, the metallic click sounding unnaturally loud in the stillness. Inside smelled of gun oil and mildew. Gears had clearly used this place often. Racks of hunting rifles lined one wall. A dusty radio set occupied a corner table, and most importantly, a first aid kit sat prominently on a shelf. Sarah went straight for it, her hands shaking as she cleaned Rex's wounds. The gashes were deep, but not life-threatening, though his left hind leg favored a nasty bite mark that would need stitches. Maya, meanwhile, tore through the cabin like a woman possessed, assembling an arsenal from the scattered supplies. "They're tracking us through those cybernetic implants," she muttered, holding up the twisted harness Rex had retrieved, "which means they'll expect us to come in blind and desperate." She paused, her eyes locking onto an old police scanner buzzing with activity. The dispatcher's voice crackled through the static. "All units, suspect believed heading toward Industrial District, armed and extremely dangerous, shoot on sight." Sarah froze mid-bandage. The Industrial District was miles from the waterfront warehouse. Someone was deliberately misleading the police. Maya's fingers flew over the radio's dials until she hit a frequency not meant for civilian ears, an encrypted cartel channel. The voice that came through spoke rapid Spanish, but one phrase stood out clear as day: "Preparar los perros para el transport." Prepare the dogs for transport. They were moving the shipment early. Sarah's mind raced. The cartel knew they were coming, knew they'd seen the notebook. This wasn't just an arms deal anymore. It was a trap baited with innocent lives. The realization hit her like a bucket of ice water. "They're not shipping the dogs out," she breathed. "They're deploying them, tonight." The warehouse wasn't the target. It was the launch point. Rex suddenly stiffened, his nose twitching toward the cabin's single grimy window. Sarah followed his gaze just in time to see movement in the tree line. Not police, not cartel soldiers, but dogs. At least a dozen of them, their eyes reflecting the moonlight in unnatural shades of red and yellow. Some wore partial cybernetic frames, like the monstrosity in the barn. Others moved with the jerky, overstimulated gait of animals pumped full of aggression serum. But most horrifying of all was how they moved, not as a pack, but as a coordinated unit. Flanking positions, covering angles. These weren't just attack dogs. They'd been trained as a canine SWAT team. Maya cursed softly, sliding a shotgun across the floor to Sarah. "We're sitting ducks in here." Sarah racked the slide, the sound reassuringly solid. Outside, the circle of enhanced dogs tightened, their silence more terrifying than any growl. Then, from the woods behind them, a familiar voice called out, "Vance." "Come on out, Miller. You've got about 30 seconds before I release the hounds." Literally. His chuckle sent spiders crawling down Sarah's spine. Maya's eyes darted to the cabin's rear window, then to a trapdoor barely visible under a moldy rug. "Basement," she mouthed, "leads to a storm drain." Sarah nodded, but Rex was already moving, not toward escape, but to the cabin door. His eyes met Sarah's in silent understanding. Someone had to hold them off. Someone had to be the distraction. Before she could stop him, Rex slammed his weight against the door, bursting outside in a whirlwind of snapping jaws and primal fury. The element of surprise worked for about 3 seconds. Then the enhanced dogs converged on him in a nightmare blur of fangs and metal implants. Sarah screamed his name, surging forward, but Maya hauled her back. "He's buying us time." The trapdoor swung open to reveal rickety stairs descending into blackness. The last thing Sarah saw before the darkness swallowed them was Rex, bloodied but standing, holding off 6 cyber-enhanced beasts at once, his movements a perfect dance of canine training and raw survival instinct. The storm drain was a claustrophobic hell, the air thick with the stench of decay and standing water. Somewhere above, the sounds of the dogfight reached a crescendo, then abruptly stopped. Sarah's heart stopped with it, then a single gunshot. Vance's voice, suddenly much closer. "Damn waste of a good dog." Sarah's vision went red. Maya had to physically restrain her from charging back up the stairs. "He's gone," Maya hissed, "and we will be too unless we move." They stumbled through the ankle-deep muck, the beam from Maya's stolen flashlight bouncing off the curved walls. The drain emptied into a creek bed half a mile from the cabin, the cold night air a slap after the tunnel's suffocating dampness. Sarah collapsed on the bank, her breath coming in ragged sobs. Rex was gone, really gone this time. The thought hollowed her out, leaving nothing but a howling void where her heart should be. Maya gave her exactly 30 seconds to grieve before dragging her upright. "We're not done," she said fiercely, pointing downstream. The waterway curved toward the industrial district, and more importantly, toward the railroad tracks that led straight to the waterfront warehouse. "If we hurry, we can beat them there." Sarah wiped her face with a filthy sleeve. Maya was right. Rex's sacrifice couldn't be for nothing. But as they moved along the creek bed, a sound stopped them dead, a faint, pained whimper from the bushes. Sarah knew that sound like her own heartbeat. She crashed through the undergrowth to find Rex lying in a pool of his own blood, his flank torn open to reveal glistening bone, one cybernetic implant's wires dangling from his jaws. Somehow, impossibly, he'd not only survived, but taken down his attackers and escaped. His tail thumped weakly at the sight of her. Sarah dropped to her knees, her hands fluttering over his wounds. "Oh God, Rex." Maya's clinical assessment was more brutal. "He won't make it to the warehouse." Rex's eyes locked onto Sarah's, burning with an almost human intensity. Then, with a strength that defied his injuries, he dragged himself forward, toward the railroad tracks, toward the warehouse. The message was clear. "Try and stop me." Sarah choked out a laugh that was half sob. Of course, some bonds couldn't be broken by something as trivial as death. Maya shook her head in disbelief as Sarah fashioned a makeshift harness from her belt to help support Rex's hindquarters. "You're both insane," she muttered, but she helped lift him anyway. As they limped toward the tracks, the first distant scream pierced the night, then another, and another, not from the warehouse, from the city itself. Sarah's blood turned to ice. They were too late. The dogs were already loose. The distant screams multiplied like wildfire, spreading across the sleeping city in a wave of chaos. Sarah's grip tightened on Rex's makeshift harness as they stumbled along the railroad tracks, each step sending fresh tremors of pain through his broken body. The warehouse loomed ahead, its floodlights cutting through the night like prison searchlights. What should have been a covert operation had turned into a desperate last stand. They were outgunned, outnumbered, and with Rex barely clinging to life, out of options. Maya suddenly grabbed Sarah's arm, pointing to the security monitors flashing near the warehouse entrance. The screens showed live feeds from across the city, dogs, dozens of them, moving with terrifying coordination. Not the mindless rampage Sarah expected, but surgical strikes. One group herded civilians into alleys where cartel gunmen waited. Another pack disabled power substations, plunging entire neighborhoods into darkness. The most chilling feed showed a police barricade being torn apart not by bullets, but by cyber-enhanced canines leaping through tear gas like it was nothing. A metallic taste filled Sarah's mouth as she bit her cheek hard enough to draw blood. This wasn't just an attack, it was a coup. The cartel wasn't selling those dogs, they were using them to take over the city. Maya's fingers flew over the stolen cybernetic implant, her face illuminated by its dying LED glow. "There's a kill switch frequency," she whispered, "but we'd need access to their main transmitter." Her eyes darted to the warehouse's antenna tower. Sarah followed her gaze, then looked down at Rex. His breathing was labored, his eyes glazed with pain, but when their eyes met, his tail gave one weak thump against the gravel. That stubborn loyalty, even now, shattered something inside her. The implant in his jaws wasn't just a trophy, it was the key. A new sound cut through the night, not screams, but engines. Vance's voice crackled over a nearby patrol radio they'd scavenged. "All units converge on downtown. We've got bigger problems than one rogue cop." Sarah's pulse jumped. The cartel was losing control of their own monsters. The cybernetic dogs were turning on their handlers, the aggression serum too volatile even for the cartel's carefully laid plans. It was their only chance. Maya suddenly stiffened. "Sarah, look." She pointed to the warehouse roof. A figure stood silhouetted against the moon. El Escorpion, his coat billowing like wings. Even from this distance, Sarah could see the remote in his hand, and the massive shape crouched beside him wasn't a dog. It was something worse. Big as a wolf, its cybernetic enhancements covered nearly half its body, its eyes glowing an unnatural blue. The Alpha, the one controlling all the others. Rex let out a pained whine that had nothing to do with his injuries. He recognized that beast. Sarah did too, the same monster that had nearly killed them in the barn. Only now she understood the truth. Diablo hadn't been the original. He'd been a prototype. This was the finished weapon. The warehouse grounds were eerily quiet compared to the chaos spreading through the city. The only sound the distant wail of sirens and the occasional gunshot echoing between buildings. Sarah crouched behind a stack of rusted shipping containers, her fingers absently stroking Rex's head as she studied the floodlit compound. Every instinct screamed at her to turn back. Rex was in no condition to fight, and facing El Escorpion's alpha beast was suicide. But the radio at Maya's hip kept crackling with panicked updates. Police retreating, hospitals overwhelmed, entire blocks falling under cartel control. There was no backup coming, no cavalry, just the three of them against an army of monsters. Maya pried open the cybernetic implant Rex had torn free, her knife tip probing its circuitry. "I can rig a jammer," she whispered. "It won't stop the dogs permanently, but it might disrupt their coordination long enough for—" She trailed off as a new sound cut through the night, a deep, rhythmic thumping, like a massive heartbeat. The alpha dog was howling. Not the sharp, sporadic barks of a normal canine, but a modulated frequency that vibrated in Sarah's bones. As the sound rolled across the compound, every cyber-enhanced dog in the city went perfectly still for one chilling second, then turned as one toward the warehouse. "They're being recalled," Sarah realized with dawning horror. The cartel wasn't losing control. They were regrouping, consolidating their forces. And when those dogs returned, El Escorpion would unleash them somewhere far worse. A school, a hospital, a crowded subway station. Rex stirred weakly against her leg, his breath hot on her wrist. His eyes said what his body no longer could. "We have to move now." Maya finished her makeshift device, a tangle of wires and circuit boards that hummed ominously. "This'll buy us 5 minutes, max. After that, either we destroy the main transmitter or—" She didn't need to finish. Sarah checked the shotgun, 4 shells left. not nearly enough. But as she looked at Rex, at the way he stubbornly hauled himself upright despite his injuries, she felt something shift inside her. This wasn't about survival anymore. It was about making sure his sacrifice meant something. They moved under cover of a sudden power flicker, Maya's jammer doing its work. The floodlights stuttered as they slipped through a gap in the fence, Rex limping silently beside them. The warehouse interior was a nightmare parody of a kennel. Rows of cages holding twitching, half-conscious dogs, their bodies riddled with implants and injection sites. The air reeked of antiseptic and infected wounds. Sarah's stomach turned at the sight of a whiteboard listing success rates next to scrawled notes like Subject 43, neural burnout after 6 hours, and Subject 17, terminated due to excessive aggression. A metallic clang from the catwalk above froze them in their tracks. El Escorpion leaned against the railing, his alpha beast at his side, its cybernetic fangs glinting. "Officer Miller," he called, his voice dripping with mock sympathy. "You should have died in prison. Now you'll watch your city burn before I let the dogs finish you." He raised the remote in his hand, a single red button glowing like an evil eye. Rex's growl was barely audible, but the Alpha's head snapped toward him instantly. The two predators locked eyes, some unspoken challenge passing between them. Then, with a speed that defied his injuries, Rex lunged. Not at the Alpha, at a loose electrical panel beside them. His jaws closed on the exposed wires in a shower of sparks. The warehouse plunged into darkness, just as the first wave of recalled dogs crashed through the doors. The darkness was absolute. Sarah's breath came in ragged gasps as she pressed herself against a crate, the shotgun heavy in her hands. Around them, the warehouse had erupted into chaos. Snarling dogs colliding in the blackness, panicked shouts from cartel members, and above it all, El Escorpion's furious cursing in Spanish. The only light came from the sporadic sparks still sputtering from the ruined electrical panel where Rex had made his move. In that flickering glow, Sarah saw him. His body broken, but still standing between her and the Alpha beast, his remaining good eye locked onto the cybernetic monster. Maya grabbed Sarah's arm, her whisper urgent. "The transmitter. It's on the catwalk. While they're distracted—" A guttural snarl cut her off as the Alpha dog launched itself at Rex. The two collided with a sickening crunch of metal and bone, rolling across the concrete in a whirl of teeth and claws. Sarah raised her shotgun, but the combatants moved too fast, their bodies a blur in the unstable light. She made her choice in a heartbeat. "Go," she shouted at Maya, shoving the jammer into her hands. "Get to that transmitter." Then she was moving, not toward the catwalk, but into the dogfight. The Alpha had Rex pinned, its cybernetic jaws snapping inches from his throat. Sarah didn't hesitate. She jammed the shotgun barrel into the Alpha's exposed flank and pulled the trigger. The blast sent the monster reeling, half its mechanical side sheared away in a shower of sparks. But it didn't go down. It turned on her with a mechanical whine, its remaining eye glowing an unnatural blue. Rex struck like a bolt of golden lightning. With the last of his strength, he lunged for the Alpha's throat, his teeth finding the vulnerable flesh beneath the armor. The Alpha thrashed, its claws raking deep furrows across Rex's belly, but he held on. Sarah scrambled for a fallen pipe, bringing it down on the Alpha's skull again and again, until the cybernetic implants shorted out in a burst of acrid smoke. Above them, a high-pitched whine built to a crescendo as Maya's device overloaded the transmitter. A pulse of energy rippled through the warehouse. Every cybernetic dog in the building froze mid-movement, their implants blinking erratically before going dark. The Alpha gave one last shudder beneath Rex's jaws. then went still. Silence. Then gunfire. Alice Scorpion stood on the catwalk, his pistol aimed directly at Sarah. "You ruin everything," he screamed. The shot never came. Rex moved faster than thought, his broken body finding one final surge of strength. He took the bullet meant for Sarah, collapsing at her feet as Alice Scorpion's second shot went wild. Maya didn't miss. A single round from a fallen guard's rifle struck true, and Alice Scorpion toppled over the railing like a puppet with cut strings. Sarah dropped to her knees, her hands pressing against the gaping wound in Rex's chest. His breathing was shallow, his once bright eyes dimming. Somewhere distant, she heard Maya calling for help, the wail of approaching sirens, the shouts of arriving SWAT teams. None of it mattered. Rex's tail gave one feeble thump against the concrete as she cradled his head. His tongue licked weakly at her wrist. Forgiveness, comfort, love. Then, with a final sigh, he stilled. Epilogue. The city would never know the full story. The official reports called it a terrorist attack, the cartel's biotech experiments destroyed in the raid. Sarah's name was cleared. The evidence in Maya's files implicating enough corrupt officials to spark a statewide investigation. The surviving dogs, those not too far gone, were humanely euthanized. On a quiet hill overlooking the K-9 training facility, a new memorial stands beside the others. A simple granite slab reads, "Rex, who proved. Even the darkest night can be illuminated by loyalty." Sarah visits every Sunday, sometimes with Maya, often alone. And if she occasionally sees a flash of golden fur in the corner of her eye, or feels a familiar nudge against her hand when no dog is there, well, some bonds not even death can break. Moral lesson. True courage isn't the absence of fear, but the will to stand between darkness and those you love. And sometimes the noblest hearts beat beneath fur, not armor.